Hello and welcome back for another episode of Write America. This literary series is spearheaded by our friend, author Roger Rosenblatt, in an effort to bridge the great divide in our country through readings and conversations from award-winning, nationally renowned authors and new and emerging writers. My name is Lauren, and I will be your host for the evening. For those of you who are not familiar with our store, Book Review is Long Island's largest independent bookstore, established in 1977. We have a great episode in store for you tonight featuring readings from writers Susan Minot and Tyehimba Jess. In case you missed last week's episode with Molly Gaudry and Bruce Weber, you can, or any of the episodes of Write America for that matter, you can watch the replay at Book Review's Crowdcast channel at any time. This episode is also going to be recorded, so if you happen to miss something or you know somebody who can't make it here tonight but would love to watch it, you can share the episode via the same link that got you here this evening. Now, before we get started, there are just a couple of things about Crowdcast that I would like to tell you so that you know how the event works tonight. First off, there is a button right down here. It says buy signed copies of Susan and Tyehimba's books. If you click that button, it'll bring you to our website, bookreview.com, where you can buy signed copies of their books. There is also a button down here that says ask a question. If you have a question that comes up for Susan or Tyehimba during the event, you can just drop it down there and we'll get to it at the end of the event. And then I also see that some of you have found the chat, so please feel free to comment in there, ask questions, talk amongst yourselves, and of course drop your emoji applause. We like to hear that you're enjoying the event. So without further ado, we're going to get started. Our first reader tonight is Susan Minot. Susan is an award-winning novelist, short story writer, poet, playwright, and screenwriter. Her first novel, Monkeys, was published in a dozen countries and won the Prix Femina Étranger in France. Her novel, Evening, was a worldwide bestseller and became a major motion picture. She currently teaches at Stony Brook University and privately. So please welcome to your screen, Susan Minot. Hi, Susan.
Hey, Lauren, how are you?
Good. So thrilled to have you here tonight. Very excited to hear your reading.
I'm very happy to be in a block next to you. I've been watching everyone else be introduced. So very happy to be here. I'm going to obviously give a shout out to Roger Rosenblatt for organizing this, which really has turned into be quite a consistent series. I'm going to read something from my most recent book, which Lauren said this wasn't awful to do, but it actually is coming out in paperback this week. And it's called Why I Don't Write and Other Stories. And this is from the first story in the book. And I'm going to sort of skip around a bit and try not to read too long. This is the story of the situations of a one-night stand. Our heroine is a family in Kenya. She's an American. She's traveled a lot, but this is her first time in Nairobi. And the night before, she met a sort of war-torn journalist who had just returned from Eritrea, and she went off with a group of friends, and they went to dancing, and she ends up going back with him to his cottage. They have a quite passionate night together, and the next day are sort of in this kind of honey glow, and she's like, where am I? And everything's quite nice. Though I will add that there's been, you do get the feeling that she's got a little bit of that disorientation that one feels when traveling or in a foreign place, that both allows you to probably do things you might not normally do, but also makes you feel a little disconnected, perhaps, from what you're doing. So they're very they're entwined with each other, and it's noon outside. After a while, he said, I'm glad you're in Africa. Can I ask you something? She said. Anything, he sounded relieved. You don't happen to have, her voice trailed off and she sort of laughed, a girlfriend or a wife, do you? Well, yes, he said in the same gentle tone, I do. You do? Yes, I thought you knew. Her body went still. They were both facing the ceiling and neither turned. I thought Bragg would have told you, he said. No, she said. Bragg didn't tell me. They were silent for a moment. Which? She said. Which what? He said. He too seemed surprised. Wife or girlfriend? Wife. They were silent again. Children? She whispered. Uh-huh. He cleared his throat. 2 girls. She turned on her side to face him, propping herself up on an elbow. She thumped him on the chest. It hit harder than she meant it to. Ow, he said. Sorry. She turned onto her stomach and smushed her face into a pillow. She reached back for the tangled sheet and pulled it up over her backside. The sheets were sort of olive brown, typical bachelor sheets, she had thought. That's okay, he said. I'm an idiot, she said into the olive brown pillow. No, you're not. I thought you lived here. One finger tapped the mattress near her ear while the rest of her remained frozen. I do, when I'm working in Nairobi. She peeked out one eye. How old are they? Fiona's 6 and Emma's 3. Jesus. She sat up, holding the sheet around her. I didn't ask, she murmured. She looked at him. He looked back. Okay, she said. So I didn't ask. Where are you going? He said. Getting up. She dragged the sheet with her and stood on the thin, pale rug. She scanned the dim floor for her clothes. I thought you knew, he said. It looked like such a bachelor pad, she said under her breath. She located her bra and a wisp of shirt. I wasn't, whatever. I didn't want to think. She found her skirt crumpled under the bed. Are you upset? He said. She was putting on her clothes and stopped for a moment. I don't know, she said. Then she started moving again. He got up. He put on fresh clothes, different from the ones he'd worn last night. He buttoned a light blue shirt, looking at each button. He went to the window and pulled back one of the curtains. More light came into the room. The gap showed a short strip of lawn and a sparse, tangled wall of trees. Where are they? He looked over, worried. Your family. In Naivasha, at the lake. His voice was still gentle, but the honey had gone out of it. We have a house there. Oh, they're out there, she said. My wife grows flowers. She looked at him, frowning. He said, on a farm. It's our business, a flower farm. Oh, that sounds nice. She found her sandals. He continued looking out the window. My wife's really the one who runs it. Uh-huh. She sat on the Kaleem-covered hassock and began strapping on her sandals. They were well-worn sandals with a wedge. She thought of how she'd gone to a lot of different places in those sandals. He looked back at her. We're apart a lot, he said. She regarded him with lowered brows. And then he comes and he sits next to her and they talk about it a little, and he's being very kind of nice to her, and she finds herself sort of drifting toward him. She felt how near he was. She thought, I'll just stay here one more minute, then I'll stand up and smile and walk out. Standing up, she could still keep a small amount of her dignity intact, maybe. She would pick up her handbag and go into the front room, find her cigarettes on the driftwood tree stump table, get a drink of water in the bare kitchenette, and wait for him to follow with the car keys. They would get back in the Jeep and he'd drive her to the guest house in Karen where she was staying and where she'd stay another 2 weeks till they finished shooting. Then she'd check out doing the story about the cattle vaccinations in Sudan and go there, or would find another story to do or another project somewhere or anything as long as it was somewhere else and Nairobi was not in it. Daisy, he said. What? She said, impatient. Daisy. She wished he wouldn't do that, say her name. She glanced up and made the mistake of looking into his face. Oh God, she thought, or didn't think. She found herself believing the concern there. Just for a second, she said to herself, and down her head came and collapsed on his chest. The night before, it had seemed as if she were sailing towards something warm and enveloping. Now she was being swept in a different direction. At least she was moving, she thought, in one direction or another. Okay, though, now was the moment to stand up. She didn't move, and the moment passed. Another moment passed. She was still not standing. Lulled by the heartbeat in her ear, she wondered if this was the moment she would look back on and think, I could have walked away, but did not. In the quiet, they both heard something crack like two sticks hitting. It came from around in front of the cottage. Now what? He said. His head tipped forward. They heard shouts. Christ, he said. He sprang up, though his expression was not alarmed, just focused. He headed for the doorway, pulled aside the purple and yellow kikoi and disappeared. The soles of his feet were the last thing she saw. She heard him rattle open the front door and yell something in Swahili. The voice grew faint when he stepped outside and moved away from the house. She stayed sitting on the hassock. After a while, she heard talking, people coming back into the cottage. She heard the man. A voice answered in English with a native accent. She got up and ducked past the kikoi into a small hallway. She peeked out from the doorframe to see in the front room. The man's back was to her, his hands shoved in his front pockets. A thin man stood in front of him, gesturing as he talked. He had a dark shaved head and was wearing a cream-colored shirt with short sleeves and 4 pockets. That would be Edmund. She had asked him before. Some people were walking by, and like many white people in Nairobi, he's got a staff of a family that lives nearby, and Edmund is the man who works for him. He was about the same age as the man. Next to him were 2 boys, not quite teenagers, looking caught. The taller one wore a large red t-shirt which came almost to his knees. He didn't look at Edmund or at the man. The younger one had a dark t-shirt which said, "Vote the Miami way." His face was also tipped down, but he was watching Edmund, his father, out of the corner of his eye. As Edmund talked, the man nodded. He shook his head. He ran his hand over his hair. At one point, he lifted his arms as if to say, "Now what?" Wait, Daisy thought. What had she been thinking of just now? She'd lost the thread of something. Oh, that's right. A wife. There was a wife. She looked at the man's back. He looked different to her now, with a wife. Edmund cleared his throat. He glanced off for a moment, as if not wanting to get to this part of the story he was telling, and saw Daisy hiding by the door. His gaze slid smoothly by her, betraying nothing of what he'd seen. The man's hands were now clasped on top of his head. Edmund looked once at the boys, then away from them, and finished what he had to say. Everyone stood there silent. The man dropped his arms. He turned a stony profile to the boys. The younger one was rolling his shirt around his fist. The man spoke to the older one in the red t-shirt, asking him a question. The boy raised his eyes, blinked slowly, and said something she couldn't quite make out, but his tone was defiant. The man snapped. His loud voice startled Daisy in her little hall. The boy did not look startled in the least. He listened unimpressed. When the man finished yelling, the boy spat on the floor near the man's feet. Then Daisy watched the man's long arm swing back and come forward and smack the boy's small face on one cheek with the back of his hand. The boy's head jerked a little, but his body didn't move. Edmund and the other boy continued to stand there. After a moment, the boy in the red t-shirt raised his hand and covered his cheek, and Daisy thought she saw a smile hidden by his fingers. So he comes back in. She's realizing, I don't even know who this person is I just slept with. I don't know what's going on here. This seems really dicey and weird. And then she sees the man go out and talk with Edmund's wife, whose name is Cecily, who's hanging laundry on the line. And they talk with each other and they start laughing with each other. And she's thinking, isn't this a big deal? And it's all very sort of odd. So this is at the end when she's waiting for the man to drive her home. Daisy stood waiting next to the Jeep in the driveway. Through the front window of the cottage, she could see the man on the telephone with his back to her, facing the wall. Talking to the wife, she figured. She strolled off to be out of sight in the bright sunlight. Many footprints had distressed the dirt. Suddenly, she felt exhausted. For a moment, she was back in the bed with the man. She felt swept up again, and it ran through her body. Sex was like that. Not all of you came back right away. Part of you lingered with the person, not unhappily. It was nice to be relieved of yourself, though eventually that part would return. She had moved into the shade near Edmund's house. The one door was open to a turquoise painted wall. There was thin grass in the front yard and a small circle of charred wood. A small child appeared in the doorway wearing a pink sleeveless dress with ruffles at the shoulders and eating a papaya. Daisy smiled and said, "Habari." Probably just very little of Swahili she knew. The girl's eyes widened and she looked behind her for instruction. Cecily appeared behind the little girl, carrying something, shooing her out the door. Her arms were straining under the weight of a large gray tub. Cecily hauled the tub to the end of the yard near some scarlet hibiscus and tossed the water out. It floated in the air like a mirror, then came down flat and made a circle of puff in the dirt. She turned and looked at Daisy, a white woman standing on the tan drive in her tan skirt. Daisy waved and smiled, rocking back on her sandals. Cecily came forward a few steps and stopped. Her smooth, solid face was not smiling. At first, Daisy thought she was getting some version of the cold stare, the look of disapproval any girl might get stumbling out of the man's cottage. But when Cecily lifted her hand to shield her eyes from the sun, Daisy saw a different expression. She was looking at Daisy with pity. There was a phrase Daisy had heard a number of times in Kenya, pole pole. It had a number of related meanings. It could mean easy does it, one step at a time, take it slow. When it was only pole, it meant too bad, or that's a shame, or sorry. It was the thing people might say to comfort someone with a little hardship. You'd say it to a child who'd scraped her knee, or to someone whose car had broken down. Pole, poor you, shame. That had been Cecily's expression. Pole, you poor thing. It was the understanding expression of a mother, though Daisy could not remember ever having seen the expression on her mother's face. Cecily had emphasized the look by nodding, as in, don't forget this conversation we have had. Poor you, shame, step by step, gentle now. How that could all be in a look, Daisy didn't know, but there it was. That's it, Lauren.
Thank you. Thank you. That was wonderful. I cannot wait until that comes out. I need to read the whole thing. So, Susan, we are going to say goodbye to you for now. We will see you back at the end for the conversation. So thank you. All right, so up next, we have a reading from Tyehimba Jess. Tyehimba is the author of 2 books of poetry, Leadbelly and Olio, which won the 2017 Pulitzer Prize, the Ainsfield Wolf Book Award, the Midland Society Authors Award in Poetry, and received an outstanding contribution to publishing citation from the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. A Cave Canem and NYU alumni, Tyehimba received a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2018 and is currently a professor of English at College of Staten Island. So please welcome to the screen, Mr. Tyehimba Jess. Hi.
Hello. Hello,
Thank you so
folks.
much.
How you doing today?
All good.
All right,
I'm gonna leave you. Thank you so much for being here with us, Tyehimba.
It's good to be here. Thank you for that reading from Susan Minot. That was really intriguing. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to read some sections of Olio. My last book came out in 2016, and Olio is about the African American creatives who were active just before and after the Civil War. In other words, the first generation of freed Black African American creatives, people who were struggling against the stereotypes of the minstrel show. Olio is actually the middle part of the minstrel show. It's the part in which a large variety of disciplines comes together to create a show, and it's actually the beginnings of what became vaudeville, and then from vaudeville it became essentially the Great White Way. That would be Broadway. So what we're investigating here is just the stories of some people that lived around that time, free Black people. Scott Joplin, Blind Boone, Edmonia Lewis. Scott Joplin was the progenitor of ragtime. If there were no ragtime, there would be no jazz. It's pretty simple. Scott Joplin, who was born, I want to say, in the 1850s, and died in New York in 1917. And also people like Blind Boone, who was an amazing piano player who played ragtime, and was born in Missouri in 1865, and was eventually became blind, but still had a phonographic memory. And also going to hear a little bit from Edmonia Lewis, who is the most successful visual artist, Black visual artist of the 19th century. She did sculptures. You can go out and find her work, and you can see how advanced she was. She sold $50,000 sculptures in the 1880s. Let's hear from some of these people. The first person I do want to hear from is a little bit about. There's a guy in this book that is traveling around to interview people that used to know Scott Joplin, and he runs into Blind Boone in his travels. And so this is a little interview between the two of them. I'm sorry. This interview is not with Blind Boone, but it's with another character that actually did know, that actually did exist and did know Scott Joplin. His name was Sam Patterson. Sam Patterson. So, well then, let me pour us a toast. Tell me, what story you want to hear? What you need to know? I want to know about his unpublished work. You helped Mr. Joplin write his final scores? Well, I was with him. I was in that room with him for days, weeks. He was pressing up on them keys like he was trying to look into a mirror and find his own face. Blood gone almost all the way bad by then. Syphilis? Yeah, syphilis. That bad-blooded dog. Bit him up and spat him out. Left nothing but dry bones and a crop of scattered nerves. Just enough for him to try and stutter out some last scraps of sound. It was rough, boy, rough. Did he get much done? Well, in a seeming sort of way. Problem was, he couldn't start one rag before he could get up and go to the next. Was all broiled up in each one. Start one sounding like morning, get halfway through and end up switching to some chords that left a midnight taste in your mouth. Start another that blew through your bones like a winter frost. Then he'd take a break and come back burning up them keys like August in a cotton field. Did he finish any of those compositions? Can't tell you. Might have, but most of what he did finish he ended up calling child's play. But they weren't any child's play, I'll tell you that. Not any child I ever met. I know because I heard him play it all together one time before he lit that match. You mean that he played the whole thing at once as one piece? The whole thing. Took all them raggedy pieces and tied them all together with a loose string of phrases all syncopated up like a gold pocket watch. A dozen little song parts ticking away, all coiled up, spitting and spinning. Time falling away and then come together at the last minute. Goodness. Did it have a name? Can't say that it did. Only saw him play it that one night, and everything he was working on was changing titles all the time anyway. One hour it'd be the If Rag, then turn around and it'd be Lost Boy. Next hour it'd be Magnetic Rag, Remember Me, Tremble Hand, Hallelujah, Bad Blood, Palms Down, Syncopated Glories, Morning Burl. Seemed like they was all getting born up at once. Everything he had me written down for all those days and nights, I couldn't rightly say that all of it was nice sounding. But some of it stuck to me so hard until I could never shake it off. Or maybe it was the way he was playing it, like he was staring down a well. And then sometimes he'd just stop and look at his palms like he'd brung up a last drink of water. Then he'd just splash it all over that piano. I could still hear parts of it in my head. And he plays. That was some good stuff right there. Except he played it all stiffed up, bar by bar. Most of the time, till that one last night. Were you there that night? I was there. Well, no, I wasn't there. I was supposed to be. See, he had just played that thing, had played it all out till there wasn't no more. He was sweating and heaving at the end like he'd been running for everything he'd ever lost. I remember once he looked like he found some secret in the music, and then he did something he'd rarely do. He sang a little with the tune, like, I'm in the wind, baby. I'm in the wind, darling. He was just twirling them keys all around, just twinkling up those high notes with big bashes of bass. Then, too, I remember there was this one part in the music when he sounded like he'd wandered somewhere deep in the notes and couldn't find a way back. Well, he found his way back all right. He just wasn't the same no more. What happened? How was he different? Well, let me see. Have you ever seen someone seem all never beaten all their life? So never beaten till it's like they was never weak? So strong till the day you come to know how weak they are, that's when you see how you never knew their strength. Well, I had been knowing him for days, weeks, years. All the time knowing about his strength, knowing he would be hitting those keys to the end. Even when he was out of it, he'd walk out with his head up. He'd seen worse, a lot worse. See, sometimes he'd be out on the road playing his set. Everything that had got his name on it, his bread and butter. He'd be up there playing all grand and professor-like, kind of stilted up and slowed down so that the audience could hear every note shimmering in its own museum. He loved each rag like it was the children he never got to see grow up. He'd be keeping them all orderly and polite, straining up their voices, not so much they break, but enough to hear them bend up a little into hope, no matter how sad they might be. But never rushing nowhere. Folks was all okay with that back when he first started playing that maple leaf and such. But it changed. He thought putting those pieces on paper would help hold them the way he heard them, make them stay proper and well behaved. I imagine he was quite eager to get his work published in order to get compensated, correct? Yeah, he was glad to see it out in the world. He wanted to leave his sound behind him, but see, it didn't work out quite exactly like that. Once those rags were on paper, every 10-fingered bowler-wearing stud would put his hands all over those tunes. Welcome slow at first, till they learned all their ins and outs. They was polite with them tunes till they figured out how to roll them out a little faster, and then make them strut and swagger more with each stride. Next thing you know, they was cakewalking them rags up and down that keyboard like a pimp in a tenderloin. The fingers were working faster, more prettier than they were supposed to be, all sticked up and leaned back and sideways stepping, hustled up and tricked out like something illegal, ill-tempered, and ill-begotten gained. It started to be like every time he went to a new town, there'd be some light-fingered hustler out to bootstrap himself up, using Scott like a ladder. Come up on stage after Scott all friendly, then play his pieces all to pieces. I mean, snapping those rags with the shoe shine boys spitting polish, trying to make the best tip of the week by showing the master how to work his own business. He say in his polite little professor tone, "Very nice, but too fast, friend." And they just laugh. He would laugh with them a little through his frown, too, because what else could he do? And what's to make it worse is that Scott couldn't keep up with him. That old dog Syphilis had him by the throat. He had gnawed up almost everything he could do with his hands. And every year it got worse. He would come into town, and some folks would think he must have been a faker, asking, how could the great ragman be all dusted up and unpolished like that? This be Scott chopping? This? But he never stopped, brother. Never stopped. Would always shake it off, even though you knew he'd been shook. Always had a plan, an opera, a show, like a premonition, right? Isn't that what kept him going? Yeah, trying to get that opera up and running kept him going for a long time, years maybe. But everybody got limits. And that night, he knew he'd just run out of time. He played that patchwork blanket of rags for hours and hours that night, all up and down the fingerboard till the air was about beat out the room. He was breathless. When he looked up, you could see there wasn't that many breaths left for him on this earth. And when I saw his face, boy, I had to walk away for a while. I went out that door, got the night air, cleaned myself off with a walk beneath the street lights. So, you left the building. Yeah. Only left about 20 minutes or so, walking around the block. Came back, and there was a glowing off the roof of the building. Ran up all them stairs, thinking the building was on fire. Maybe one of them Johns had dropped a cigar on the roof. Got there to see him standing next to this big old metal trash can, all blazed up with his songs. Must have put some kerosene on them because they was blazed up pretty high and hot. I could feel the heat off those rags. Damn, all them beautiful rags. I could feel the heat from 10 feet away. And I could see Scott on the other side, his face all lit up, his hands trembling and holding one last stash of scribbled up music. Can't stop something you know is going to happen anyway. I mean, you still got to try. And I did. I tried to fix my mouth to talk at him, talk him down from all that mischief the sickness had put up in his brain, but what could I say? All the things you would say in the same situation. Don't do it, Scott. Your voice on paper, your work, think of your bloodline of sound all burning up, man. Who gonna show 'em, man? People need to know. You know what he said? What did he say? It was almost like he knew it was coming. This giant hand of wind came right over us from the river. And he threw them rags all up in the air and into the palm of that hand. And it made a fist and smeared his music all over New York. All them notes, all scattered over Manhattan like so many raindrops. All them notes burning up in smoke. What'd he say? all in the wind, Sam. It's all in the wind. So that's a little section of uh, Olio about Scott Joplin, who actually died on April Fool's Day in 1917, not very long before the beginning of World War One. And what I think I have time maybe for one more poem. And what I would do is I want to read one poem about a guy who was a really good friend of him. I see somebody went to his gravesite. That's pretty fly. A really good friend of him named Blind Boone. Blind Boone was a guy out of Missouri, like I said, born 1865, right after the Civil War. At the age of 6 months, Blind Boone, well, he was born sighted, but he caught encephalitis. And the only cure that the doctors had, encephalitis is basically your brain has a fever and it's swelling. So the only cures they had, they didn't have any antibiotics or any aspirin or anything of that nature. So the only real treatment they had to relieve the pressure on the brain was removal of the eyes at the age of 6 months. You know, having a phonographic memory. He had a trick where he would if you could come up and play something on the piano that he couldn't play back note for note, he'd pay you $1,000, and he never lost his bet. So, fascinating guy. This is Blind Boone out of Missouri. Blind Boone's blessing. Bless the fever in that night, in the 6th month of my life. Bless the fever, for it gave me sight. It swole my brain to fit God's gift, brought the hand that would lift each eye from my infant skull. Bless the sweat, my baby ball. Bless the horse that hauled the surgeon through dusk's dark, half drunk and swearing into mine. Bless the flame, sterilized the metal of the spoon. Bless the path between lid and bone, slipped and slid by that instrument of my deliverance from sight. Bless the handling of the knife. Bless that night that gave me night, wrapped around my bloody face, whispered how I could be grace notes, arpeggios, a piano roll of sound, copying each note from everything around me. You see, I'm sure at first there was the hurt and the scalding pain. But then again, bless an infant's too short memory. All I know is what lies beyond light. I've learned this is what's right for this one right here. Yes, bless the fever, then listen close. Spare an ear to this piano and shut your eyes close. Thank you.
Wow. That's beautiful.
Well,
That
thank
was
you.
so beautiful. I'm glad I went first. I couldn't follow that, I don't think.
No. That was an
Wow.
intriguing story. A lot of questions lay in that in the story you told.
Mm-hmm. What was the one you had at the top of your head? Probably that one.
How it's going to shake out with a man with a wife and 2 kids, and how this traveler is going to conduct the rest of her journey. And I guess I have some intrigue about the political landscape as well, and how that is involved in the novel. So I got new things to read.
This is just a short story.
short story.
Yeah,
Okay.
the book is a collection of short stories. So
Right.
it's but I think I think in this story, I think Cecily intervenes at the right moment. She gets a sort of message to pull herself together a little bit in a
Yeah, I
in
see
a
that.
sort of in a strange way, right?
Right, right. I
Um,
see that.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
she finds. I mean, I didn't. I probably should have read the couple of sentences after, which said, "When you get a gift like that, you should take it and listen to it." She thinks that. So,
That's real. Yeah.
hmm
I love short stories are I love short stories. They're so hard
do you
to
write
write.
them too?
No, not really. I mean, what I just read was kind of like a short story, but it's really in an interview form.
Very,
So,
very much so, like a short story. That was very narrative, if you want to call it a poem, but
yeah.
it I think it had all the elements of a short story. The first one particularly, though
Right.
even the second one, um, Blind Boon, it's it's a monologue. It's describing a situation and an acceptance of
Right.
where he finds himself, and it's just beautiful. I have a question for you about this is just a logistical one, but the so it's so the the person being interviewed who knew Scott Joplin, did you take, I don't know, this is a kind of boring question, but did you take some facts from that, or did you
Yeah.
just pretend just totally create? I mean, it sounds like with all these historical figures, you 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 had a lot of interesting facts to work with.
Yeah. Sam Patterson really existed. I mean, he was a real piano player. He was more than piano player. He was he was actually kind of an entertainer at large. Um, if I remember correctly, they knew each other back uh, from for decades, really, and they were fast friends, to the end of his life. Um, so really, what I'm trying to do is to find as many facts in the historical record as I can, and build a narrative around the, those facts, and also allow for the imagination to create things that opportunities for people to meet, and people to trade opinions, and things of that nature. I
But
just
but
found Scott,
but that destroying of his work and burning and
yeah,
sort of losing his mind, that really happened.
that didn't necessarily happen, but what happened is towards the end of his life is he was committed to the New York State Mental Hospital,
Uh-huh.
because he had syphilis, and syphilis eventually, you know, seeps into your brain, and you can't really function
Right.
very well.
Yeah, you go
Um,
crazy.
yeah, but he was very frustrated towards the end of his life. But what I really was really imagining to a certain degree was, what if Scott Joplin was playing like Cecil Taylor back in 1916, 1915? What if he was playing like modern jazz back then? What if his condition didn't narrow his scope but broaden his scope, so that he could see into different kind of understandings of the pathway of the music that he was involved in. So I was kind of interested in that aspect of time travel in a kind of way. but
Mm-hmm.
but also trying to voice his frustration with his position. Because he died. His audio is one of the most. We know who Scott Joplin is. If there's any ragtime player, we know
Yeah.
that one
Yeah.
name. But he also died rather poor. Rather poor. Yeah.
So was he, but did people know who he was then? I mean, did he have a name for himself when I feel like I've seen posters, Scott
Yeah.
Joplin
He was
playing,
very
right?
popular.
Yeah.
Very, very, very popular back in the day. But at that time, music comes and it goes, and it has fads, and then it it has trends and whatnot, and that era of ragtime, it was we were in 1917. You're getting into the swing era, you know,
Yeah.
and swing is a different. Really, swing is swinging ragtime is really what it's doing, and then the
Yes.
Dixieland jazz and all that. So it's really just taking it and slanting it, and then projecting it in a different kind of way. But
Are you,
that's my very very non-professional musical
well, I was going to
opinion
say, are you a
of the music.
musician as well as a
No,
musical
no.
scholar? No.
No, let me put that in with an asterisk next to it.
Yeah,
Right.
but you're, the way you read the poetry, I mean, the poetry itself without even being read is very, I mean, I know poetry is always supposed to be musical, but it
Well,
isn't always, it's got,
there's a movement in American poetry called slam,
yeah.
and it's basically a kind of performance poetry competition. And I was on the Green Mill Slam team for 2 years out of Chicago, where slam
Oh,
originated.
wow.
And
Uh-huh.
you had to get up on stage, and if that was a place where if you don't do right, they would encourage the audience to boo you off the stage. So
Right. Oh my
it would
God.
it would pretty much make you step up. Yeah.
Yeah.
But let me ask you about your stories. How do you start those stories? I mean, do you come up with a kind of a theme initially, or do
No.
you?
The theme you kind of find in you I don't know if it was, I think it was John Updike who said, writing a story is like seeing something out of the corner of your eye. Like you don't decide before I usually, I think I'm oriented more towards sound. I'm more oriented towards visual. I also paint. So I see in a situation, like I see an image, and this story used to be called A Bright Slash of Light because through the curtains in the room that they're in, it's noon, and there's just this narrow little slice of light that comes cutting into the room. And that was my first image, with a man and a woman who don't know each other, kind of after a night together. So that's the beginning of it. And then you start thinking, okay, is a good thing going on between them? Is yes, but then they don't know each other. So that you think, okay, so what would be the surprise thing you find out?
Right.
If you sort of didn't bother to ask, maybe, and how that suddenly can change something, and then you start thinking of, if you end up in a very intimate situation with someone. I mean, this is not, none of these are kind of conscious thoughts I have. They're sort of instinctive ones, like, okay, then without knowing a person, you're in his house, and what if something weird happened? Like, you don't know this person, right? You don't know this
Mm-hmm.
country.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know, you know,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and so it can make for more surprises, right? So you start thinking of the different things that can happen. You don't
How
know
do
until
you
you're
know what?
done.
And
Tyehimba.
that's the question I was going to ask is it, how do you know when you're done? That's and that
Well,
for me is always
some
such a,
people. One good friend of mine, Amy Hempel, who also was a reader in the series, she says that she starts a story with the first line. Like, and usually there's something intriguing in the line. She's very like a poet the way she writes, because her stories are shorter, and the language is chosen in a sort of a sometimes playful way or unusual phrasings, and then so she thinks of the first line, and then she thinks of the last line, and then she just fills in between as if that's but that's how she
okay.
thinks of it.
Okay.
You just, and this is something that I tell my students all the time. You have an idea of the story you want to write, but if it was all mapped out in your mind, it wouldn't need to be a story, right?
Right.
You find out literally sentence by sentence where you're going, and then you go back and you get rid of all those sentences, and then you fill in these sentences, right?
Yeah.
And then you think, okay, now I'm sort of getting at the vibe that I wanted. And in the writing, you start seeing the themes that come up, of
Yeah.
dislocation, or there are a lot of, it's like noon, but it's dark, and she doesn't understand what's going on. And so you sort of start playing up shades of light. That's just a sort of,
Right.
So, I
Yeah.
mean,
I
Chekhov used to say, you write a story and you take off the beginning and take off the end, and then you'll have your story.
I love that. That's Chekhov.
That's a good
Sounds
way.
like Chekhov.
But everyone's
Love his
got
short
their
stories.
own ways,
Yeah. I think that I think that one thing that I try and find out is like you never know what the surprise is going to be. Sometimes the surprise
That's
is
right.
really small. Like I expect that line to go this because that when that line goes like this, it inflects the whole poem in a different direction. But and then or sometimes the revelation is much larger. Like or you learn something about a character that you really didn't understand before, or you fill in a place that they didn't have filled in before.
That's
Um,
right.
that happened a lot with with my last writing process with Olio, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the intriguing thing is you think you know what you're getting into, but you really just don't know
Right. And
what it's
I,
really
I
gonna be
think
like at the end.
the when you think of something, sort of the first thought is often the superficial thought, right?
Right,
And then you keep thinking about it and you realize, okay, that was part of it, but here's where it's really worth
right,
kind of exploring. Yeah, definitely that
yeah.
happens. There's Lauren back to maybe ask
Yes.
us things.
Yes, I hate to
Hey,
cut you
Lauren.
both off. Hi. But we do have a couple of questions here. So I would hate to not get to
Okay.
those. So this first one is from Adrienne Unger, one of our participating writers. She says, hi, a question for Tyehimba. What drew you to the theme or subject of post-Civil War creatives? Did you have an interest in this beforehand?
Okay, well, thanks for the question. My first book was about Leadbelly. Leadbelly was a guitarist who lived from about 1885 to 1949. He's pretty popular. I mean, he's at the cornerstone of American folk music. It's impossible to study American folk music without running into Leadbelly. And so I did more or less a biography in verse of Lead Belly. And then that book led me to the question of who were the people that influenced Lead Belly? Who were those? Who were the people who were playing music around Lead Belly's time, talking 1885 or so? You know, so that means you're talking about more or less the first generation after the Civil War, and what was their world like? And so that opens up other questions like, what does it mean to play an instrument for yourself and for your own gratification and not for the gratification of a master? What does it mean to obtain an instrument even that your master would never have given you, and then to master that instrument, right? And create a new form out of that instrument. What does it mean, what does it mean to create music as a job for yourself, like creating a living out of thin air? This is like the first generation of Black folks to really experience that in this country. And there's so many more stories, frankly, that I could have gone down. There could probably be about 35, 40 olios, just of the various people I ran across. I could only grab a few and put them in this particular book.
But you also included, and I thought you were going to read the poem about her, Edmonia. Is that how you say her name?
Edmonia Lewis. Yes.
Yeah. Who
Edmonia
weirdly
Lewis. Wildfire.
Who weirdly I kind of went down a rabbit hole and found during the pandemic. So I actually knew who that was, and yeah, she was incredible. She was like half African American, half Native American, right? And then she was like this fabulous European sculptress of marble. I mean, amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, she was, and when she moved to Rome at the age of 20, okay, after going through a terrible experience at what's the name of the college? I can't remember the name of the college at this moment, but she had a terrible college experience where she was accused of almost killing two other students, and she had to go through an amazing trial. and then pretty much right after that, she said, "I'm going to go to Rome, cut the marble out of the mountains myself, and then create my statue creating career," and became a huge success. Just an amazing individual, and became a kind of icon of society where she was. She was, all kinds of amazing folks used to just stop by her house. Frederick Douglass used to roll by her crib, in Italy. So fascinating person. Sorry, you take me down the rabbit hole.
Yes, no, she's really great. So you included people, not just musicians, which is good. You got her in there. Yeah.
I was mad that I had not heard about her when I was in 6th grade. That's what made, I was like, how did I not hear about this person? So
yeah, I heard about her because last year I'm on an island in Maine right now, and there's a painter here named Eugene Poole who wrote a book called, what was it called? It was about like incredible artistic women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? And he just talked about 7 different ones, and one of them was Edmonia Lewis, and I'd never heard of her before.
Yeah, fascinating.
Ain't it the way?
Fascinating.
Yeah.
We have another question here from another one of our writers, Paul Muldoon. So this one is for both of you. How do you instill a sense of not knowing in your students?
I was gonna say, I don't tell them when the quiz gonna come. No, just
that's a good one.
A sense of not knowing. That's an interesting question. A sense of not knowing.
Mm-hmm. How do you instill a sense of not knowing in your students?
Okay, well, I will say this. I started off my class this year referencing a few historical facts that were relevant and were relatively unknown. Uh, One is and they were prompted by the events at Congress or at um, the
Capital.
Mm-hmm.
invasion, the coup attempt,
Mm-hmm.
etc. So there was what I was able to do, what I was trying to prompt in my students in terms of not knowing was an understanding of something that Toni Morrison said. As we go into the future, we find out new things, but also we're finding out new things about the past at the same time. They become uncovered. And I was trying to unearth or instill with them an understanding of history will deepen their work and give their work a kind of resonance and purpose and lastingness. And so I talked about a town in North Carolina that had a successful coup, and I think it was 19. I'm forgetting some of the details right now, but it was 1896 or so. And I think it was Wilkinson, North Carolina. I'm forgetting the name at this particular moment. But I wanted to bring that fact to them in 2021 in order to let them know that this was not the first time this history was happening in their country. It wasn't the first coup attempt that their countrymen had witnessed. It was, a matter of fact, a repetition of the same exact kind of action of conservative or conservative reaction to the same exact thing: black people getting the vote, black people exercising the vote, and black people winning a political office. It's the same exact thing. So I'm sorry, I'm really forgetting the exact name of the town, but Gary Lilly actually wrote a book of poems. Wilmington, North Carolina is the name of the town. Wilmington, North Carolina. There's a coup in, I believe it's 1896 or 1898, and they basically just killed a lot of black people and ran them out of town because they had a successful vote, just like the vote they had in Georgia this year, right? Which was a successful black vote, and which led to the kind of crazy incitement. Which, if those had been black people, they would have been shot. I'm just gonna say that. That's to me, that's very obvious. So.
Mm-hmm.
For them, that was a revelation, and I think that they felt upset that they had not received that knowledge in their primary school or high school education.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so why they're like, why am I finding out about this in my poetry class as an undergraduate at College of Staten Island?
Maybe for your next book, you rewrite all the history textbook to include all the things we should know.
That's way too big a task.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things is about the not knowing is it's one of the reasons for the sort of argument for literature, because literature is almost an example of how hard it is to know something. So I think as far as trying to get that message across to students. For me, I taught this year seminar on the short story, and you can't. So it would be, the answer to Paul would be repeatedly. You you try to, every story is an example of not knowing this, or knowing this, but it seems to be that, and it needs to be, because it's not about a factual thing. I mean, you find out about facts, but how hard it is to even when you know a fact, know what that means to me and what that means to you, and that it's right. And literature and short stories particularly seem to address that.
All right, and we have time for one more, even though we're going a little over, but that's okay. This one is another one from Adrian Unger. This one is for Susan. Having the characters in the story you read be located in another country, and deeper element of dislocation for the main character, and the notion of waking up in a strange place. Are there other stories with Kenya as a location?
Not in this book. There are other stories, but probably most of the characters in all the stories feel dislocated, though. So that's the obvious way to do dislocation, put someone in a different country, but you can have that right in your own backyard, I think, just as easily. I did just want to particularly commend Tyehimba, who 2 days ago had his appendix out, and he's actually showing up here and has not passed out, or it's amazing. It's amazing. Well done. And that your recitation was beautiful, really beautiful.
Thank you. Well, thankfully we live in an age without antibiotics and and
yeah,
whatnot.
But still.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I was able to make it. So it's good to be here, and it's.
Well, I'm so glad you
really,
did.
Thank you, Susan.
Yes, we're all thankful that you were both here this evening. I want to thank you, Susan and Tyehimba, for participating in Write America. To everyone who tuned in tonight, and of course to Roger Rosenblatt for dreaming up this whole lineup. Don't forget to click the button below or visit bookreview.com to get your hands on signed copies of Susan and Tyehimba's books, as well as all of the writers in Write America. I hope to see you right back here next Monday at 7 o'clock for another episode of Write America, this time with Meg Wolitzer and Robert Lopez. So we'll see you next week. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Peace.
Bye.